Welcome to episode 11 of How to CE5, where over the course of 21 episodes, we are covering 21 basic things for you to do so that you can be a great CE5 ambassador and make contact with ETs. I'm Andre Cardoso, and today we'll be talking about lots of the great CE5 resources that are available out there that you can use to educate yourself and grow and become a better ambassador to extraterrestrial civilizations. We are just over halfway through this series of How to CE5, and I hope you've been enjoying listening and that you've been putting the information to good use. If you haven't listened to the previous episodes, go back and listen to them. There'll be, wherever you found this episode, you can go and find other episodes that I've published. While I have been toiling away to get these episodes recorded, I feel entirely indebted to the CSETI team for all the work that they've done up till now to reach the public regarding the vital necessity of engaging in this work of CE5. To this day, the best resources that I have found available on the subjects of UFOs, free energy, and related secrecy and the science of consciousness are under the projects which Dr. Stephen Greer has been involved in. So in this episode, where I will go over additional resources available out there through the internet, I'll be featuring the excellent books, papers, and documentary film footage which has been put out by Dr. Stephen Greer, the director of CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. I want to start by letting you know that the resource that's going to be the most accessible and useful for a lot of people is the new CE5 Contact app, which is being put out by Dr. Stephen Greer and his team. And this app is jam-packed with features. It's got training resources and documentation. It's got tools and instruments that you can use out in the field, such as the crop circle tones that we use to signal out with, and a magnetometer which you can use to detect any fluctuations in the electromagnetic frequencies of your local environment. And we'll also have a new update that allows you to connect with other people in your local area who are interested in doing CE5 as well. Now, at the time of this recording, the app isn't published yet, but from my understanding, it will be released in April of 2020. That's this month, so keep your eyes out for it. All right, next we'll get into the books. Right off the bat, I want to recommend the book called Contact: Countdown to Transformation. And this covers the experiences of the senior CSETI team for the first 17 years of documented CE5 fieldwork expeditions. This all took place between the years of 1992 and 2009, and it's great to get a sense of the quality of the contact experience and the history of the movement that you are now a part of. I would say this book is probably the most impactful resource that got me into the subject, actually. So when I was first researching CE5, I decided to order this book, and I read it, and the accounts in this book and the whole variety of the experiences that people have had doing CE5 really spoke to me. And it's just a great illustration of all of the different levels of Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind and the amazing quality that comes through in coming together as a group to do this work. There's just some real magic in this book, and for anyone who's really interested in learning more about the subject, this is the one that I recommend the most. The next book I'll recommend is a book called Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, and this is Dr. Stephen Greer's autobiography, where we get a glimpse into his fascinating life and a sweeping telling of the history of the fight for disclosure, contact with ETs, and the proliferation of new energy technologies, which Dr. Greer has been involved in since the early 90s, when I was just a toddler. This book and accompanying CD or MP3s also include some guided meditations for CE5. The next book which I'd like to recommend is the book called Unacknowledged. The subtitle of the book is An Exposé of the World's Greatest Secret. Unacknowledged is a review of the real story of UFOs, the vast mechanisms of secrecy, cover-up, and disinformation, and also gets into the breakthrough technologies and the wonderful, sustainable, and peaceful society that's waiting on the other side of disclosure. Another fantastic book by Dr. Stephen Greer, which was written in the 90s and was actually his first book, is called Extraterrestrial Contact: The Evidence and Implications. And this book, though it was published in the 90s, is really still very relevant and has a lot of details that most people don't know. It has some of the best UFO and ET cases and evidence, some of the great testimony that's come from witnesses involved with the Disclosure Project. We'll give you a really good understanding of why this subject has been kept secret and why the ETs are here and what we can do to connect with them. Some of the great papers that Dr. Greer has written are also included in this book, and I'll go over some of my favorite papers a little bit later in this episode. All of the resources that I'm mentioning in this episode are going to be available at SiriusDisclosure.com, Dr. Greer's website, and any ones that I specifically mention, I'll include links to in the show notes for this episode. The next set of resources I want to cover in this episode for you are the documentary films that are available to you. So the first one, of course, I'm going to recommend is the film Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind: Contact Has Begun. And this film will be premiering around the same time that this episode goes live, so it will be available online from the 7th of April in 2020. And this film promises to be a great introduction to the subject of Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, CE5, what some of the encounters have been like, what the implications are for this kind of work, what effect it's going to have, and how you can do it yourself. So go watch it if you haven't seen it already. And once you've seen it, and if you want some more information about CE5, some of the details, want to hear some more stories of people who've gone out and done this themselves in groups, come back to this podcast. There are tons more episodes like this one that will give you resources and insights for how to do this yourself. Another documentary, which is one of the most watched documentaries available on the web today, is the film called Unacknowledged. And this came out at the same time as the book called Unacknowledged. And it's just like the book, but it's more condensed and accessible to a wider audience. So again, it has details about the UFO cover-up, about how and why this subject has been the subject of secrecy for so long, and points to the idea of a false flag alien invasion, or this kinds of scenarios, the false flags that have been used as a means of controlling the public. So watch Unacknowledged and get educated on all of that. The other major documentary that was also produced by Dr. Greer is a movie called Sirius, which came out around the year 2013, I believe. And this is the first major documentary that Dr. Greer did, which covers topics like UFO secrecy, new energy technology, CE5, and the curious case of the Atacama humanoid. If you haven't watched Sirius, it's a great film. A little bit of that film is now not really up to date, especially the material that goes into the Atacama humanoid. So there's more follow-up on that on Dr. Greer's website, SiriusDisclosure.com. And of course, there are hours and hours of amazing witness testimony from Disclosure Project witnesses, and also speaking engagements from Dr. Stephen Greer on YouTube or on Vimeo. The amount of filmed witness testimony collected by the Disclosure Project is staggering, and just watching a small portion of it can be life-changing. It was for me. Dr. Greer has also had some fantastic speaking engagements and workshops which are available online, where he does deep dives on things like the science of consciousness, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, free energy, the secrecy at the heart of the topic of ET contact, and so much more. So get on all of those video resources available to you now for free online. Go watch that stuff. And the last group of resources that I'll go over in this episode, last but not least, are the papers. So some of the most important insights related to disclosure, contact, and the next stages of the human adventure have been outlined in papers by Dr. Stephen Greer and members of his team since the 1990s. These are quite concise and clear explanations which address a lot of the questions that people may have when coming into this field. So in this episode, I want to go over a few of the papers which are most useful when it comes to CE5. Now, one of the most complete resources that you have in terms of papers that you can read through to get acquainted with CE5 and to learn how to form your own group to do this is the Working Group Manual. That's available on Dr. Greer's website, and it's quite a long document, but it has tons of great information on it. Dr. Greer has a few papers written on the science of consciousness and CE5, and I think the most helpful ones to read through are the following. There's one called The Crossing Point, another called The Foundations of Interplanetary Unity, and yet another called Extraterrestrials and the New Cosmology. And that one, Extraterrestrials and the New Cosmology, is really important for you to understand how the modern science of consciousness intersects with the activity of making contact with extraterrestrials, and it's critical for you to understand the points made in that paper. He's also got some great papers written that relate to the disinformation campaigns and false flag preparations around the subject of UFO secrecy and contact with extraterrestrials. And this topic has been spun by the people in power to warp the understanding and create an atmosphere of fear and confusion around this subject. The papers that I recommend reading are When Disclosure Serves Secrecy, A Harvest of Fear, Media Play, and The Unacknowledged Threat. As an alternative to all of these resources that I've mentioned in this episode, there's a great comprehensive home study program put together by Dr. Greer's team called the Contact Training Program. It combines several of the books, papers, lectures, and meditations mentioned in this podcast episode, and I'll have a link to that also in the show notes for this episode. Okay, so those are some of the best resources out there that I can recommend to you. There are lots of other resources that I didn't have a chance to get into in this episode, as I wanted to really just put the focus on Dr. Greer's work at this moment, since he's coming out with this new documentary, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And of course, there are other resources available out there. I'll probably be getting to them in other episodes on this podcast. I've got some friends who are creating some great content out there on YouTube and putting out some wonderful interviews with people. And I hope to connect with them later so that we can grow some more people-powered media around this subject, which is based in the truth of Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind and what we can all do to be a part of this initiative. Okay, the next 10 episodes will be all about CE5 fieldwork. How do we put this all into motion as organizers? And what is it like to be out with a group, applying all of the principles and information we've covered in the first half of this series? Again, if you haven't listened to the first few episodes, go back and listen to them, and stay tuned for the next episodes coming out. We'll be talking about things like how to signal to ETs, how does ET contact manifest when you're out in the field, how to build coherence with a CE5 working team, how to plan well so that the night goes really well, and so much more. I also want to let you know that in addition to being put out as podcast episodes on all the podcast players, you can also listen and watch animated versions of these podcasts online on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you on the next episode. Take care until then.